Hello, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute or two just as people are coming into the conversation. Good to see some familiar names on the list, but we'll just give it another minute or two. We will also be promoting you all to panelists. So you'll be able to turn on your cameras and interact with you. We have a fairly small group today. There'll probably only be about 10 or 12 of us. So it would be great to be able to see your faces and interact with you on the questions. But we'll just give it another minute or two, see how when people slow down coming in. Okay. Hey, Brian. Hey, Francis. So again, we're just promoting attendees to panelists. Don't be afraid. We're not going to make you speak or anything. Don't be afraid to accept the invite to be a panelist and jump on over. It'll just allow us or allow you to be able to turn your camera on to participate in the discussion if you like. You obviously don't have to. You'll be able to put questions in the chat as well. Okay, what do you think, Patrick? Do you want to get started?
Sure thing.
Okay, so my name is Mark Patterson. I'm the executive director of Magnet, and Magnet is the Center for the Future of Work, Innovation in the Future of Work at Toronto Metropolitan University in Toronto. And I'm joined today by Patrick McKenzie, who I'll let introduce himself.
I'm Patrick McKenzie. I'm the CEO of the Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia. So we're a nonprofit in the immigrant settlement sector, but very much focused on the needs of employers and how they can identify and recruit, retain immigrant talent into meaningful employment.
Yeah, and so we're going to have a conversation today. Magnet, we've been hosting webinars and in-person sessions across the country, talking to a bunch of different groups about the evolution of generative AI and some of its impacts on job seekers, on small, medium-sized businesses, on those working in the employment service, immigration settlement space. And so we're having a lot of conversations. There's a lot of really interesting things happening, new applications happening every day. There's a lot of fears, maybe uncertainty, but also excitement as well. So we're just here to have a little bit of a conversation today. We're also going to provide a 1-hour training course to anybody that attends the webinar. We have a 1-hour training course that was developed in partnership with a colleague at Harvard, as well as an AI company that we work with at Magnet. It's free, and you're able to extend it to any of your employees or colleagues or friends. And it's really just a basic 1-hour course. What we noticed was a lot of the courses tend to be a little bit longer. We want to make sure it was as kind of quick and short, just the basics. What is generative AI? What are the advantages? What are some of the risks? And also some basic information about prompting. So that'll be made available in a link for everybody who's attended the webinar today. But today we're just going to have a conversation, and we hope that all of you will join in. Again, you can turn your chat on. If you choose to stay as an attendee, I see there are 6 people in the attendee section. You should have been invited and promoted to join as a panelist if you like. But you can, if you do join as a panelist, you'll be able to turn your camera on, interact with us, and join in the conversation. But we're happy you're here to listen and participate if you want through the chat as well. So Patrick, I'm going to maybe turn it over to you quickly to tell me, what are you hearing? You mentioned how your organization supports employers that are hiring newcomers, and you do a lot of work with employers, building capacity with employers around onboarding, training, and retaining newcomers. But maybe you could tell me a little bit about what you're hearing with the employers you're interacting with. What is their take on Gen AI? What are they seeing? What are they hearing?
No, it sounds good, Mark. I mean, we deal with employers of all sizes, in particular with the focus on SMEs in the last couple of years, just given the structure of the Canadian economy and the prevalence of small to medium sized enterprises, in particular in BC, but it's very similar from coast to coast. Um, I mean, there's certainly curiosity around it. I think the what becomes evident really quickly is that leadership in most companies don't even know what questions to ask around this stuff. They're at a loss to even understand what questions they should ask to see how they might be able to implement it in their workplace. They see the potential for productivity gains. They see the potential, to remove or sort of replace some of those more mundane tasks that people are doing with AI, but they don't understand the startup costs. They don't understand sort of how to manage even implementing this into their companies. They're scared as to what some of the employees might think or how the employees might use it. They're nervous around privacy. They're nervous around. I mean, if you've used ChatGPT recently, see there is a line right in there. It's like, don't put sensitive stuff in here because we could be using this elsewhere, or something to that effect. And so companies are very nervous around IP with that, and we've heard stories in the media around that. One of the other areas that I find interesting too, it's on the hiring side of things. Hiring managers that I've been talking to are saying they're seeing a market difference in the types of cover letters and resumes they're seeing that are clearly not written by the individual. And so, one example that was given to me the other day by a school principal here, looking for a finance person, said that so normally it used to be, hello, Mr. Esteemed Principal. Thank you for kindly considering my candidacy for the position. And it was just this very eloquent speech. And now everything is right to the point and really efficient. And so, and he's not even sure what to make of that because he knows he's not going to get that writing generally when they show up to work. But then again, you have this tool that could be used to make things move a little more smoothly. So, just generally speaking, a lot of uncertainty and very little clarity on where to start.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. There was a recent report. Some people may be interested in looking up after. It was Microsoft and LinkedIn report. They do an annual report, and uh, they basically said that 75%, and this was kind of the global average in the countries, and they did Asia, Europe, Middle East, North America, South America, etc. But overall, 75% of employees are actually using generative AI at work, but they're not necessarily telling their employer. And I think the average in Canada was around 66%. But the incredible thing is that it's increased. I think it increased 46% in the last 6 months. So, with the explosion of ChatGPT onto the kind of scene in November of 2022, since then, we've been seeing unprecedented kind of adoption and an exponential rate of change. So the generative AI, large language models, compute going into large language models has been about for the last 5 years been doubling every 4 to 6 months, which is an absolutely crazy rate of change growth and kind of investment. So yeah, it is a very interesting time. We've had a lot of discussions across the country, and sometimes I actually do a word cloud. Like I'll ask people to close their eyes and think of like what's the one word you think of when you think about AI, the future, your career, your job, your organization, and get everything from excited to terrified. And sometimes it's the same person, right? Like they're both excited and terrified, or both excited about the possibilities of the potential, but also worried about some of the negative impacts, we're already seeing with the proliferation of misinformation and other pieces. But kind of in the workplace, I think one thing we try and make sure that SMEs are aware of is that it's already here, right? Like it's actually in all the tools that you're providing to your employees. Maybe not yet, but in the next update, it will be. If you're using Adobe, you're using Microsoft Office tools, almost any of the tools we provide our knowledge workers have generative AI tools built into them. And I was actually speaking with the federal government ministries this week, and they said, well, what should we actually be funding? Should we be funding, we're always hearing Excel is really important in the workplace. Should we be funding Excel or should we be funding like Gen AI? And I'm like, it's not actually different anymore. Gen AI is being built into kind of all of these tools. So it is really interesting. People that are copywriters are seeing a 40-50% increase. Myself, I would say I'm definitely seeing 5 to 6 hours a week in time saving. Just, I had to prepare for a podcast 2 days ago. The podcaster sent me 10 questions. I took the quest and it was on Gen AI. I put them in Gen AI, got 10 answers, and then changed them. Right. And I think like that's one of the things that I think we need to think about, and we're talking to employers about. Like if you hired a new employee, you wouldn't just ask them a question, take blindly what they create it for you, and then send it off on an important project, right? There's iterative, you're going to review it, you're going to go back, you're actually going to add your experience and fact checking, and kind of that's how we think it's really important to be providing training, understanding prompting, knowing what the tool is good for, what it's not good for, where the risk is really important.
Well,
So yeah, we're hearing all the same things, Patrick, and I think that's pretty kind of par for the course right now.
and that's what folks are looking at their hiring. I mean, we see this just generally in the immigration space. Is that folks say they don't know how to hire folks from overseas. We've seen that in outcomes for decades, the conversation for decades around foreign credential recognition, Canadian experience, pieces like that, which are used to illustrate. I think they're used as to illustrate, or as in some cases excuses just not to hire. But we're seeing some of the more innovative employers move more to that skills-based hiring. I mean, Forbes has an article out recently on that. I mean, everybody's talking about that, and certainly, Mark, you and I have been talking about that since before we met each other. And so, if we're looking at AI, and I go back to what I was saying, where the leaders don't necessarily have the knowledge base or the skills base to be able to know what questions to ask about how to implement it properly, as you're hiring folks looking not only for those skills, the how to use AI, how to use the technology, but you do need people who know their business. If you ask generative AI for something and you ask a bad question, or you ask a question poorly, you get garbage back out. And if you don't know it's garbage, off you go and you spout garbage. And so, it's a very Canadian example. My brother's huge Habs fans. If somebody played if they had 5 minutes worth of ice time in the '70s, they know who they were. And so, my brother Mike, and I think you've met him, Mark. He popped in, who's the greatest Montreal Canadian player of all time? And this thing pounds out a big essay, and it says, focuses on Maurice Richard. And then in it goes, however, others would say his line mate, Guy Lafleur, could be that. And you'd have to know that Guy Lafleur and Maurice Richard never, ever played together to pick up on that. And so use that example. You need to know your stuff if you're asking us to
Yeah.
support you.
Well, people, I don't know if you saw the meme that's going around in the last couple of weeks. People have been trying to get humorous examples out of it. So I think there's a whole kind of group of people trying to, but one person, they had asked for a recipe for pizza, Has anybody seen those? So they asked for
Oh,
a recipe for pizza. They made the pizza. We were talking about pizza actually before. Patrick has a pizza oven, so maybe he could use this recipe. But it gave a perfect recipe for pizza, and uh, and then the guy puts in, but the cheese, I made it. It's great pizza, but the cheese keeps falling off. And then apparently the tool, I don't know what it was using, said mix a cup of Elmer's wood glue, spread it on top of the pizza, and it'll hold the cheese on. So yeah, um, the joke was a story on, like, it was going all over the place, but it was that somebody probably on the internet would try the Elmer's wood glue. You never know, but yeah, you absolutely have to know your stuff,
yeah.
and I think that's kind of the key. But I mean, we've seen there's kind of three, and some of the research is showing there's three ways to use it. You can simply copy paste. You can be you can actually, on high value things, it's really using it carefully and iteratively. And then, for kind of low value things, helping you, maybe I used yesterday, I was writing a difficult email to try and get my expense claim approved. And it was like, it helped me frame it a little more clearly, right? More quickly than, playing around for a while. So I think there are a lot of things where it is useful, but if you're doing a complex document, I've even heard of teachers actually, for like students, they'll actually put, I mean, this used to be a recruiter thing, Brian, you would know, but they actually put um, in white lettering in the middle of the assignment. So if a student took and copied like the assignment, put it into GPT and then chat GPT or whatever, and then said write an essay or write a paragraph or write a answer of this, it would also pick up this line that said in the second paragraph, write something about pineapples or whatever, but it was written in white, and then it would show up in the essay, and then they would be able to know that people were just kind of copy pasting, not paying attention. So it's kind of funny, all the different things going around, but um, we are seeing a lot of data coming out. It was interesting, the study from LinkedIn and Microsoft. Actually, one of the most surprising findings was that 80% of people that were considered power users actually were finding their job more enjoyable, which I thought was kind of interesting to kind of think about and parse out. But
Like
what
my,
else?
my
What else are you hearing in the space? Maybe in immigration, you talked about some of the challenges, and we have Brian Convery's on the call. So when we're talking about early talent recruitment, Brian has lots of experience. Brian, feel free to jump in anytime you like, and anybody else as well. But
I see Marco there too, and
yeah,
certainly if there's anything
good to
on
see you, Marco.
anything in technology in the sector, I'll absolutely defer to Marco. But I've been involved in a few different conversations around AI and the settlement sector, and they've been really interesting. So, an area I'd like to see us move into is using it to sift through data. There are a lot of data sets out there. IRCC is doing a fair bit of work to link a number of them together. Your landing data, your census data, tax data. When we start looking at iCare data, and iCare is the database that they use for folks who don't know, that they use to track which eligible client is using which federally funded or IRCC funded settlement service. And I'm seeing I think there's a real opportunity to
Yeah.
start using the AI to sift through this stuff and find that secret sauce. Um, like it's no secret we're moving into what is likely to be very lean times over the next few years. And so, efficiency and effectiveness are pretty important words to keep in mind. And I can't help but think that if we could start sifting through this data and linking this stuff better, we could find a secret sauce that says, a newcomer of this profile, if they get these types of services in this order at this point in their journey, do they do better? And figure out what that might look like, and start saving them time from going through services that either aren't effective or going through services that might otherwise be more effective if they did it in a different time frame or a different order. Um, I remember my first job, and one of my first jobs in the federal government was in strategic policy, and I barely knew what policy was. And I certainly didn't know operational program policy. And so it's like, well, I had the wrong job first. And so I wonder how often might we be doing that for the services, the expensive services, and the limited services that we're able to offer out there. And so what could we be doing differently? Um, so that's one end, but then I'm also seeing from frontline delivery, like organizations that are doing much more frontline delivery than we do. It's triaging. It's helping to figure out intake and deal with some of those more mundane tasks, that we talked about earlier. You also have the opportunity then to refer out a little more easily. So if somebody shows up to my door and I don't have the right service for somebody, well, maybe I can send them over to diversity or send them wherever. Or if it's a virtual program, send them to Access, even if they're located here in Vancouver. And I think that's the type of collaboration I think that is going to be way more possible, much more possible, yeah, with this type of technology. But there has to be an openness to it. And I always say with the sector, like we do God's work, but we do it with our elbows up. Like there's certainly there could be a lot more collaboration and willingness to do so. And I think technologies like this give us the opportunity to really leverage that with sort of willing participants.
Yeah, I mean, generally we've been talking about kind of publicly available tools directly leveraging kind of the large language models where what you put into it ends up in the training data of those large language models. But we've actually built a tool, and maybe just I could take 2 minutes and just really quickly, because I want to conceptually talk, Patrick, about what you were saying. But you can build a platform that's powered by one of the large language models. You can actually build it in a way that we can make it interchangeable, so we can actually decide which large language model we're using. We can basically put content, material relevant to the topic that this site is designed for, and then it's drawing from that content. So it's not drawing from the entire training data. You can do retrieval augmented generation to constrain it to the content that you want it to be constrained to. So you're seeing a lot of verticalization of kind of using the large language models, but creating purpose-built tools for different sectors, different areas. And I'm just going to really quickly show you, because I think it's relevant to a lot of people on the call. And we built this this tool in just the last few months. But so basically, I won't take much time here. Can everybody see this? So this is currently, this version is being powered by ChatGPT 4. But a person has created an account, they've uploaded their resume, and they can just hit, they say the area they want to work, and they can hit and it'll start taking the skills that are in your resume and rank matching against all the jobs that are in the system. So you're not searching by title anymore. It's actually picking and rank matching jobs based on fit in the location you're saying, or within the area, and then showing you those jobs. So for me, one of the biggest issues we had is, well, what are jobs, like somebody searching on Indeed, but is there another job that's called something different? There were a lot of issues around that. You can also really quickly just say, based on my resume and skills, what are training programs that are available that I could take to upskill? But you can use this kind of environment, back to your point, Patrick, where you could actually have it set up immigration. You'd have all the training programs from all of the immigration supported organizations in a region. You could fill it kind of with content and information, like immigration, like legislation, rules, policies, kind of sky's the limit. Obviously, we're still testing how some of these things work, but it becomes really interesting. And anything you put in this is not going into the training data or anything else. Again, you can create a private, secure environment that is using the power of the large language models, but is not not feeding into their training data. But this is just an example of a tool we built in the last couple of months that we're just starting to pilot. And it's very flexible. You can change. It's really just the platform, and you can customize it to almost any application that you want. So
No, that's fantastic. One of the platforms we use, and we've talked about linking it into this because I absolutely see where this is. Like I said, again, so that effectiveness, the efficiency is pulling stuff together so that people get a more personalized and hopefully more valid set of options for themselves. But we're looking with the platform we have Shift IQ for our FAST program. It's
yeah,
doing real-time translation on the questions. And so you can actually then separate out, is this a language issue or is this a competency issue? And then train for or adapt for whatever the issue really is there. Because and we're just, it's a small example and a relatively simple example, I think, but just ways in which we can hopefully get to better outcomes for folks as a sector with this.
yeah. I mean, the research is showing it's really raising kind of so it's having some impact on really high performers, but it's also raising kind of the boat for others that are using it. You gave the example of somebody writing a cover letter, and then are they going to be able to write at that level? Obviously, we want to make sure that they can use the tool, interact with it, improve it. I had another webinar yesterday, and somebody asked on it, well, we're talking about what is prompt engineering, and my opinion, at its core, it's really just critical thinking, critical analysis, logic, being able to ask a good question. And the person asked, well, what if I'm doing it in my second or third language, and I'm not able to ask a question appropriately? Well, I said, why wouldn't you ask it in your first language and then maybe translate it, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for employers that are open, and it will help people transition more quickly. But they're still going to have to be able to prove their expertise in the field that they can add to fact check all of the other things. But I think it could help transition some newcomers that may be struggling with some language challenges and help them learn even more quickly by using the tools appropriately. At least that's my opinion. But I would love to hear and turn it over to some people, even if you come on as panelists. So you guys are in jump in. I mean, we've got a lot of Marco, Brian, Francis. I don't think we've met before, but nice. Thank you for joining us. Saba, great to have you on the call. And for those of you still in as attendees, we'll get to your questions as well. Feel free to put it in a chat. But anybody have any comments on what you're seeing in the work you're doing? Marco, do you want to say anything? I'm putting you on the spot. Brian, you're next.
Sure, why not? Actually, going back to this conversation, there's a couple of pieces. One, Patrick, related to your example of the use of ChatGPT. The conversation we haven't had in our sector, for example, for newcomers is, let's say you're writing that cover letter, and your English isn't as strong as you would like it to be, but you present yourself with a solid level of English, and then you get that interview, and then the reveal. And what are the implications for that in terms of the reality that you also described, which is that it's still difficult to get employers to tap into immigrant talent. And will something like that actually make it worse? If that's their experience, for example, oh, I've been, whatever the language they choose to use, but that's one concern. The other piece, which you're both sort of talking about with the tools, Mark, that you just shown, for example, there's at least 2 or 3 others that I know, like Refugee Jumpstart, Peace Geeks, who are developing AI-related tools to help employment. And what we end up doing in the ecosystem is the same. We're replicating the same kind of approach that we do with content right now. So if there's 500 funded agencies, there's 500 versions of how to get a job and how to write a resume. And we'll eventually have 500 versions of the AI to help you do that. So where's the kind of above the system ecosystem where we're looking at, as you described, I think, Mark, a little bit, where are the relevant existing content repositories now, like the settlement.orgs, like the Welcome to BCs, like, you know, even some of the apps that are out there that have authoritative information. And instead of trying to replicate individual AIs, what about something that pulls it all in a way that's not, I mean, the mundane word is to scrape, right? But to pull in the authoritative sources so that someone goes into a chatbot and starts asking questions, and it starts to drill down and go, okay, well, where are you settling, and where are you, what is your occupation? And instead of them having to figure out what's the right site to go to, what's the right agency to start with, they're actually getting that information along that pathway. And that requires something that isn't technological, because the technology can do that, right? You can probably set up some sort of an AI that says, these are the 10 authoritative sources, use only these to answer these questions, test it for risk, test it for hallucination or misinformation, whatever we want to call it, and really work that out. But how does that get sort of pushed out to a sector that is very siloed, very competitive, and is going for all of these individual AI solutions along the way?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. And that was my big frustration with the AI. Like, it was an AI project that Deloitte was trying to do for the sector. And I said I'd join as long as this wasn't an inside track for the 6 people on the call. And when they landed on, they wanted a chat bot, which I don't know if anyone's ever bought a used car, but if you've gone to a website, there are lots of chat bots out there. I don't think you need Deloitte in there building that for you. Folks got their back up the second it referred someone to another organization. And it's like, well, like, what are we doing here? And so you hit it right on the head. And I honestly, with the sector, I want to blow my brains out half the time, because they'll say, well, the funding model doesn't, doesn't promote collaboration. Well, that's foolishness. It's not the funding model that needs to promote collaboration. It's the leadership that has to, right? Like we've got 55 settlement agency partners across the country that signed partnership agreements with us to deliver 1 or 2 of our programs. We give it away freely. They give it to their clients, and they get to count the client. We don't. And so it can be done. It just has to be organizations want to do this. And it's that mentality, it's that scarcity mentality that I think gets in the way.
I would just also like we work across immigration, employment services, post-secondary, etc. And if you're an employer, you're even above that. So, and it's the same across all of those groups, and it just multiplies. So when you have an employer trying to, like, if you took Ontario, you have 45 publicly funded post-secondary institutions, many of them, as Brian would know, with different job boards. You have 1,000 locations of Employment Ontario, with all different job boards. You have immigration settlement, you have, ODSP, you have the Indigenous settlement organizations, on and on. Like, the fragmentation is an issue, and that's kind of where we've been thinking for a long time. And so AI is a tool that could help that. But you're right, like, we have other things around the technology, Marco, around aligning incentives, or to your point, Patrick, leadership. I do think that, the funding models don't always help, my personal opinion, but there definitely needs to be leadership. But just back to your point, Marco, like, there's a couple of models, and there's so many tools you could use to actually create, but also the sector could create a proprietary large language model that was fed by some kind of authoritative source that any app trying to serve immigration could tap into, right? And so that's one that might be a government level or higher, but you could actually do that. And I would argue those are things we should be looking at to allow for innovation off of that, but have kind of a set. We're working with Peace Geeks, we're working with FFAI and Thrive, and kind of all of the organizations. I think it's good to allow innovation, but how are things connected together so you don't have the fragmentation? I'll go back to Marco for this, and then I realize there's somebody else has a question in the yeah.
Yeah,
Go
thanks.
ahead, Marco.
I just want to push back a little bit on the funding because I think it is structurally, it's been shown over the years to be part of the impediment in creating competition. So that's become structurally embedded in the sector. Yes, we need to push back at that. And there are elements of that happen for sure. But it's also part of the reality that the sector has given the funder a roadmap around technology that is well beyond AI, right? But that contributes to it. In fact, including around data maturity, not just digital maturity, but good AI implementation, as we know, requires exceptional data maturity, or it goes back to the garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. And we're not seeing those kind of baseline competencies being developed across the sector. We see it, like I see Liz is here from ISS of BC, a great example of a technology-enabled organization in the sector, and does share some of their learning and makes some of their products and services available, whether through social enterprise or just through open content. But that's not a model that is necessarily always encouraged, and the funding model does contribute to some of that. And when we have, for example, massive investments at the IRCC level for their client experience platform that doesn't take into account the handoff to the settlement sector, right? So they're building a Salesforce implementation with, is it Deloitte or Accenture, one of the two biggies, and there's nothing in their conversation. Accenture, thank you. There's nothing in that model that we've seen that says, how does that handoff happen in a seamless omni-channel kind of experience? Because one of the things we do know is that not all newcomers find out about our access settlement services, and certainly a proportion of those don't want to, even when they know about them. But a certain proportion would say, I would have loved to have accessed that if I've known about it. And here's the technology handoff that makes it simple. We will opt you in, and you can decide if you want to access this service or not, but you have it available to you. There's IRCC released their data their data annual report, or sort of not annual report. Sorry, let me pull it up here. It's their data strategy for the next few years from 2023 to 2026, and it makes no mention of, it makes two mentions of AI. One is around algorithmic assessment and the risks of AI. And so there's nothing in there that talks about their strategic direction around, for example, Patrick, the use of iCare data, which this sector does not have access to, right? And that's part of the problem, is we can make Gen I access as much data, but if the data itself is not accessible or available, or the people trying to access that data, no matter how good the Gen AI is, don't have the right literacy to put the right prompts in to generate good data coming out of that AI, because there are prompt engineering is a thing, and you get really different results depending on what you put in there. We have foundational challenges with the actual data that's available, the competencies in the sector, and the models that we have towards building those competencies. So it's not an impossible task, but it's one that we already know what needs to be done. And the leadership, yes, has to be pushed from the sector, but we also need to see collaboration at the funding level, which is where it's going to make these things happen. So what happens when, ISS of BC, for example, may be big enough to have a data person? I know that Achieve has one, Costi may have one, but what about the 5 to 20 staff size organizations? They're not going to be able to make a case for a data person, but what about a regional data model, or whatever you might want to call it, for example? We need to be innovative in these solutions, and we can't do that without the space to think about it. And that is part of the structure of the funding model, to create that space, right? The current funding for SDI, for example, the service delivery improvements, they're one-off projects, and even the successful ones don't spin off into something more unless people can find their own money outside of IRCC. So there are structural funding challenges. They've been identified. Solutions exist, including in other federal departments, to address some of these things. But until we kind of figure that out in terms of leadership from the sector in collaboration with a funder that thinks of their delivery partners in an afterthought kind of way, we're still building in a broken three-legged table system, for example. So, and rant, but there you go.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of your points, Marco. Jennifer Freeman, actually, at the last Metropolis, I was on a panel with her and Salesforce and Accenture, and we were pushing on this exact point, there's been no consideration of, it's great that they're working on what they're working on. The technical architecture is there to start thinking about bringing the sector in, but it's not. They haven't really Like they weren't thinking about that when they put all of it together. So, and it's something we tried to emphasize in that panel, whether we were successful or not. But I know there were other questions, and I missed that. I'm not a very good Zoom webinar moderator, I guess. Brian is trying to get unmuted. Amy, are you able to unmute him or one of the admins? There you go.
There you go. Thanks, Mark. Great points, Marco. And one thing that as I'm listening to everyone here, and I think as we kind of see these infrastructures being built, it reminds me of my days back in the US when I was a global consultant with technology, and I was the workforce transformation leader of a lot of these initiatives. And what I see happening right now is the end users and sort of the sectors and the others are becoming an afterthought. And what's starting to happen, at least in the talent acquisition space, is we're seeing, I've had some deep conversation with employers lately, and they're already releasing recruiters and people because they think AI is ready to take over and do that job. So I think that's the part that as a talent guy, it concerns me because and I want to ask Patrick this question, so it's a bit of a comment and a question, but is that if we're jumping right to AI and we're thinking, okay, let's get all rid of this transactional stuff, that's great. You still need a human to be part of these processes because I have seen systematic issues right now, exactly with example, I work part-time for the University of Windsor, and we have a program where the students complete their work term at the end. Well, the AI in place at a lot of these employers says you need to be returning to school. So all those students go right into the do not hire bucket and no one ever sees them, right? So this is how AI is not helping the situation with the fact that this is how this was set up. And I brought this up this past week, but Patrick, my concern is those barriers, right? So those barriers that are being reinforced or reinvented or even new barriers to people trying to break into these opportunities. And from what you do with your council, I feel very strongly, and I'm a big advocate for immigrants and newcomers, as Mark knows, but I feel like some of that is even stacked higher against them right now if we don't actually put some sort of workforce transformation, human touch to these implementations, or we're going to be, especially in the immigrant newcomer space, it's going to be worse than it was before, because at least me being the human guy who goes and reaches out and grabs them and pulls them into the interview, no one really cares for that right now. My humble opinion. So what do you think, Patrick, about how do we try to bring this to the table of those barriers and talk a little bit more about how the human side of this needs to start having in parallel to the technical architecture these really important conversations?
I mean, the human
Thanks.
side, the human side's absolutely critical too. So I mean, the end of the day, that's what all of this is for. You know, it's you say like you balance as a country, you want to balance the books, or but only to serve your citizens. You know, you want to adopt technology, but only to serve either your employees or your clients or whoever that is. You know, I had a board member a few years ago, Fiona McFarlane, probably one of the most impressive people I have ever met. You know, and you know, and I remember her saying, like, whatever the new technology is, it doesn't really matter as long as we're training our people to work with it and to use that to their ends. And so we have this desire to look for silver bullets on things, and we want to say, okay, well, AI is going to solve this problem. AI is not going to solve this problem. You know, is AI going to put us out of work? It's not going to put us out of work. Every technological revolution has resulted in more work. It's resulted in more jobs. So one has to assume that, you know, I think it's safe to assume that, yeah, this is too, like whatever is going on right now is going to ultimately lead to more jobs, but different jobs. How do we make sure folks don't get left behind? And immigrants have been getting left behind for decades. You know, and you know, my thing is we're having the wrong conversations by and large around that. Like we keep talking about foreign credential recognition. We've done it for 60 years. How's that worked out for us? Have we fixed it? Right? Clearly not. So we're having the wrong conversation, I believe, for 80% of jobs out there, anyways. You know, and not, and for God's sake, some people think that that means credentials don't matter. When I say that, that's not it. Clearly, they do for some jobs, but they don't for most. They didn't for mine. My title's CEO. Nobody asked for a transcript. right? Like, and I kind of guess that most of you were in the same boat when you were hired. But I think it is like, and it does come down to, as leaders in a sector or leaders in an organization, how do we want, like, what is it we're trying to accomplish here, and how realistic are we trying to be around what the solution is? Like, look, I've written a number of articles and stuff. Says, like, don't look at immigration as the silver bullet to your labor market problems. It is one part of a solution, and the same with AI. That could be one tool in the tool chest, but ultimately, if this stuff doesn't serve the people, and whoever they are, if it's an internal audience or if it's the clients you're trying to serve, if there's students that you're trying to attract to your school, um, then it's not serving its purpose. And then it starts to, and Mark knows this well. I can go down a ton of different. Marco's certainly, I'm sure, heard me talk enough that I can go down a million different rabbit holes at any given point. But then we start looking at our productivity issues, and how is it that we want to apply this to help us there? How is it that we want to help? How is it that we can use it to help all people do well? It's not just about concentrating, productivity or concentrating wealth or concentrating ability in a few hands. It's like, can we use this to even out some of the bumps there? And if we lose sight of that, we're going to continue down the road we're on right now, which, I mean, just in my case, look about 100 kilometers south and see where you're going, right? Like, we need to be really, really careful about that.
Yeah, it's I think it's really interesting. I'm just going to pick up on one thing, and then maybe Liz and Francis, if you'd like to jump into the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. But I absolutely agree that AI in the long term will create more net new jobs, but I do worry about what I tend to call the messy middle. So we always use this, research a few years ago is the robots are coming, they're going to take all our jobs, we're going to have to figure out UBI. And then now it's like almost the opposite. I've been at so many events where, no, don't worry. It always creates more net new jobs. It's all fine. Look at the Industrial Revolution. And I'm like, yeah, look at the Industrial Revolution. How many years did it take to transition, and how much pain was caused in the middle of that? So I do worry, like, I do think it is long, but I do think there's going to be significant disruption. And I personally, I was at an event where Accenture was speaking. It was a CD Howe event a couple of weeks ago, and there's like, well, we're just telling CEOs, as you free up more, capacity and everything else, you can just retrain and redeploy and, keep the worker in mind first. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what you guys think, but like the first CEO that sees the ability to legitimately trim employees will be, right? So I do think there's going to be an adjustment period, and we always those who are underrepresented in the labor market tend to suffer first in those kinds of adjustment periods. And so I do think we need to be paying attention to it. But that's my rant for the day.
Well, but like, Mark, I don't know if anybody here has read the book Janesville. It's about Janesville, Wisconsin. There's a GM plant.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about it. I haven't read it, but yeah.
Like, a GM plant closes down, and you see the effects in the community. And so the GM plant closes down. Well, then the Delphi plant closes down because they sold to the GM plant, and then you see it cascade down. Then restaurants start to close, high school programs start to suffer, and it follows basically 12 or so folks through the story of what happens. And the community rallied like textbook perfectly, like and it's the retraining programs that you said that, Mark, that reminded me of this. So they did the retraining programs, they got their federal grants, they got their state grants, they did all this work. And like, I don't want to spoil the ending, but in the end, the only one who did better out of the 12 stories was the bank manager. Like, it was like It's a Wonderful Life all over again, except it was Pottersville. Like, it was suicide. It was, people had to leave, like broken, like family breakdown and all this. And so, like, that messiness, absolutely. And I like we do have to be mindful of that, because folks are going to suffer. Like there will be suffering through a transition like this, and you know we've been seeing it for some time. In my case, and you know certainly with Liz and with Marco, the folks we're here to serve, they are the ones that are going to suffer first. And part of the problem is we're selecting them based on needs that are probably a little outdated. So they're already, you know, I think that hurts, hurts their potential to do well too. But no, it's a scary prospect for most of us.
Yeah. When we're talking to leaders in kind of the employment and training sector, it's to, because there's such a push for efficiency and cost savings and so on, but like thinking about how to give your frontline workers that mental space, the time to be like fully there in their job when they're working with people, I think is really important. If you can remove some of the mundane tasks, that's good. But I do fear about, again, the funders pushing pure efficiency and how that'll end up. But Liz, Francis, do you guys have any? Amy, can you unmute Liz?
So, Liz can go.
Or Francis, either. Go ahead.
So I have a question for you guys, and it goes back a little bit to what you, Mark and Patrick were talking about earlier about this issue we've all been dealing with for a couple of years now, AI-generated resumes and cover letters lacking, the voice and not matching the language level of the applicant, particularly for newcomers and other people who are non-native English speakers. And something kind of new, or at least new to me, someone brought to my attention last week related to that is that some of our students, and I work in a university department, there's 95% international students. Some of our students are attending virtual job interviews and having an AI bot or whatever listen in on the interview and generate answers to the questions in real time, and just reading those answers in response to the question. And obviously, like, I think it's fairly easy to tell when someone is doing that, but as the technology advances and people get better at using it and better practicing those skills, what do you think the implications might be? Does that mean the end of the virtual job interview, or something else?
I mean, I think it's I mean, there are going to be so many changes, and I think it's a good, like, if that's the path somebody's on, there's going to be a day of reckoning at some point when they end up at the job. I mean, like, that's the reality, and but I expect a lot of people will try and do that for a while. People will see the results of it. It is going to be a thing. I mean, it's just the way, maybe human nature, hopefully. People are kind of coached and counseled when we can to not use that approach. But the misinformation, disinformation, the deep fakes, all of that stuff is really, really concerning. Like, let's just like call it what it is. Like, I don't know if you said there was a company in Asia where they had the CEO, the CFO, and the treasurer and the special projects person. The company, it was people on a Zoom call like this with their voice and their video of all of the coworkers, and people, it was a scam. They convinced the person with the keys to transfer $30 million to another account. So like, wow. It is happening, right? So you could have somebody, I guess, that could fake their much lower stakes than that, but could fake have a Zoom call, and it could be an AI deep fake.
So potentially an interviewee who is really good with AI could use some kind of deepfake technology to make it look like
if they're that good, I would hire them right away.
Yeah, so exactly.
You don't
it's demonstrating those skills.
So I mean, that's the other side of it. But yeah, I think there's going to be a whole new world of, and this is what I mean. There's going to be a lot of chaos. We're going to find different things. There's going to be it's going to be massively disruptive. It's going to disrupt certain careers, industries, and I think, we're basing that. And, I have a presentation as well. I can send it to you guys after if you're interested. You can just email me. But, when you look at education and workforce, in 2023, McKinsey did a study with the advent of generative AI. The potential for disruption went like kind of through the roof compared to just other AI applications, machine learning, deep learning, and so on. Like with generative AI, significant changes. And I don't have an answer for you really, Francis, except to say that we're going to see a lot of this, and there's going to be a lot of like just incredible, crazy stories. But I think at the end of the day, the person doing that's got to know that it's not a good path, right? Or like
Oh, yeah, for sure.
right. But hey, I was interviewed. I had a headhunter call me one time from the UK. They were doing a final interview, fact check for the CEO of this massive multinational insurance company, which I won't mention. And they're calling me and saying the candidate says that they got their MBA from Ryerson University at the time, which is TMU, where I work now. And I was managing the MBA program at the time in 1967. I'm like, well, that's surprising because we only started it in 2006. Like people do this stuff all the time. People will use AI to do it. It's human nature, but I don't know how you're going to deal. At some point it's going to, if they're following that kind of path, it's not going to work. I think saying I can use generative AI really well, I use generative AI and source it in my cover letter and so on, and being upfront. And then I think employers should be more open as well. There's this other side to it, like to say, hey, maybe I can open up my pool more because of these tools. Maybe they can interact more. So like I think it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But Liz, I want to
Absolutely.
give
Thank
you
you.
the last few minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be quick because I do have a 10 o'clock. But firstly, just thank you. I'm so glad I joined this today. This has been such an interesting topic. Working with job seekers, immigrant job seekers on the front lines, it's really interesting because you see them using AI to try to conform to the system. Because if they're coming in with the resumes that they have created on their own or what they think is going to pass in Canada, they're not getting phone calls. So they're using AI to then kind of be competitive to get those phone calls to at least get them in front of an employer. But what I do is I try to teach them to use it well, because what I've noticed is there's patterns of AI language that becomes very apparent in accomplishment statements or in cover letters. And so it's getting them, like you said, I think it was you, Mark, that, read it. You don't just take the answers and then run with it. You do have to either get somebody to kind of fact check it or make sure it sounds authentic or tailor it more so it's got your voice in it. But in terms of the market, in terms of what we see of immigrants getting hired and the competition and how quickly many of their applications are dismissed because they don't have local experience, they're just trying to fit in. And by using this tool, it's what's helping them. So someone like Brian, who is saying, he's the one that's willing to look at an international application and give it a go, that's great, because there's lots of people who aren't willing to do that. And Patrick, to your point with the translator in the interview, I mean, that's a game changer. I speak Spanish. I can't imagine having to go into a professional interview and sell myself in my level of Spanish, and I'm like an advanced speaker. So when we're asking people to do that, and then we throw in the nervousness and realistically the desperation of these people needing to be employed and wanting to impress this employer, you put all that in, that's so much pressure going into an interview that oftentimes they bomb it. And so if they can use that translator to fully understand what's being asked of them, and even to kind of build their answer in their own language and then send it back, that employer is going to get to see what their capacity is. And on top of that, they already speak another language. They've got the skills, they're here, they made that choice, and now they've got other tools. So this would just be amazing if this could all pull together. But with that, I'm terribly sorry, I have to jump.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really important perspective to bring as well, because of the pressure on individuals, how we're actually forcing. And I think this is a conversation I'd love to have more discussion on. How do we help both employers understand how to use the tools and accept, but also people looking for jobs and not getting those opportunities, how we can help them. So I really appreciate the comments. I do notice that we're at time as well for everybody. I think it was cool. Maybe we'll do a version 2.0, Patrick, later on. Stuff's changing so quickly. I think we could do another one. And I've done a bunch like last week and whatever, and they were way more people. This was the best one so far. Had the most fun on it. So I appreciate everybody that joined. Saba, we didn't get to hear from you, Yassine, but really appreciate you joining.
Saba's one of our mentors at IECBC, so we're very happy to see her. I just, Mark, I really appreciate that, and that Magnet pulls these types of conversations together, and certainly the folks here. And I wanted to pick up just on what Francis was saying earlier too. I think as employers, as hiring managers, we could actually be looking to the educational sector, look to high schools, look to universities and colleges to say, how are they kind of sifting through this stuff, and how are they teaching their students to either work with AI, but then also what are they doing to pick up when they're cheating with AI? And so I think there's some back and forth that we could have there, because I do, in talking to my siblings who are teachers and my kids' teachers, I think they're at the coal face on this in a lot of ways that others don't realize they should be, too. And so some collaboration there, and I think some conversation back and forth there could be helpful.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be interesting. My personal opinion as well is like it's going to shake out. This is the first wave of technology, the first, but certainly that is actually affecting knowledge workers, which by default are decision makers and policy makers and government and whatever. So it'll be interesting to see the resistance as well in some sectors to embracing the tools. I think we need to be thinking differently about how we educate. When we have such access to information, I think, one of the key things, critical thinking, I was joking this last week when I said that we all should go back and do our BA instead. For those of you that did a BA, maybe it's all good, but yeah, it's going to be interesting times, but really appreciate everybody joining today. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for version 2.0 of the Patrick Mark Show. But I appreciate all you guys joining in.
Thanks so much. Great to see you.
Thanks very much, guys.